Namaste to you all. Namaste and welcome to this weekend's edition of Ayushman 2020, celebrating Ayurveda, the science of life, which is co-hosted by the Indic Academy Consortium of Centers and Platforms and the ABP Research, which pillar of strength for us. I'm going to introduce you to the subjects that we have for this evening. Our session is broadly called Divik, which is that is integral to life. And this is divided into two sessions this evening.
Rahul, your voice is coming across a bit feebly, please. Your voice is coming across very soft and feeble, Rahul.
Yes. All right. I'll speak up then.
Thank you. That's better.
The first session is in fact life integral, and the second session is Ahara. Ahara, which is the science of the preparation and consumption of food and the rhythm of diet. Jaivik itself is somewhat more difficult. It's one of the Sanskrit intranslatables, but it would relate very much to the nourishment of all that is vital in the science of cultivation and the understanding of the energetics that brings us what in later languages we call nutrition. Today, we are at a point where there is both the darkness of the industrial retail model of food, but there is the enlightenment that this particular model has been a failure, continues to be a failure, and needs to be replaced. It does not need to be replaced by anything new. It does not need to be replaced by an invention, but it needs to be replaced by what has always existed in our civilization, which is an understanding of the place of food and the origin of food in our life. And this is what we will be able to shed some light on in these two sessions. I am happy that in the first session, we have two outstanding intellects who will give us the benefit of their very lengthy, very extensive experience and their wisdom. We have with us today Ayurvedacharya, Professor Dr. G. Gangadharan, Director of the Ramaya Indic Specialty Ayurveda Restoration Hospital in Bangalore, who will speak on the importance of using traditional varieties of food and the effects of using crossbred species. Dr. A.V. Balasubramanian for Indian Knowledge Systems in Chennai, and his center is responsible in great degree for the revitalization of hidden and obscure and almost extinct varieties of paddy in Tamil Nadu. He will be speaking about Vriksha Ayurveda, traditional Indian plant science, its current relevance and potential. And you will see as the session progresses and transforms into the following session on Ahara, that there is the integral aspect and the integral element will become very clear as we move from the science of life energetics into its manifestation as crop food and how we prepare it. And with that, I would like to invite Ayurvedacharya Gangadharanji to please begin your lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you, for making a part of this great initiative to bring back the lost glory of India's health tradition. To start with, I have given my topic as organic food and Ayurveda, organic farming and Ayurveda. That's the correction I would like to make. Before getting into the topic per se, I just would like to bring to the notice of the people that how certain names are getting on our head without knowing that some of them, there are some way it is misnomenclature being done. Because farming has to be organic. In Indian context, farming was never be separated from organic, because we believe the organic farming, the Indian farming always has been rooted on organic principles. And second nomenclature we give healthy food. Food is supposed to be healthy. That by definition, if something is not healthy, it cannot be called as food. So it is implicit that food is healthy. Healthy food is a misnomer somewhere, because that much we have deviated from the truth of the fact that food has to be healthy if it is to be imbibed. And farming has to be organic if it is to be used by human being or living being. So from that, we have slowly deviated, and the Western worldview has overpowered our thinking process, that even the naming, like the alternative medicine for Ayurveda. Actually, Ayurveda is not alternative medicine at all for India. So like that, there are so many names which has to be looked into more seriously. And Ayurveda as a science has been always make the point very clear that the human being and the living being and the macrocosm outside the external universe are one and same. It is an extension of each other. It's a connecting link. It is in a continuous existence with in connection with each other. So there is no separation made in terms of its basic premises. So we say that Yavando bhavaha murtimadan dehe tavando loge. Yavando loge tavando dehe. This principle is there in everything that Ayurveda, in that terms, any other Indian sciences, be it agriculture, be it metallurgy, be it other even system like the humanities like music, dance, all those things is basic principles of Pancha Mahabhuta, becoming the fulcrum of everything that is having existence, has been very clearly mentioned. And I will always believe that we have to be in unison with external universe, always. That's why we have got Dinacharya, we have got Ritujacharya. We know that the external universe is changing. There are 6 seasons that's coming and going in a rotationary way. And we are adjusting our lifestyle, our food habits, our clothing pattern, other things to suit to the external changes so that our body is not put into imbalance. And many of the diseases are happening because we are not able to tune with the external universe. So I think this is a very basic thing one should know that Ayurveda holds to. This is the basis in which Ayurveda has built its whole theory and practice of healing. So Ayurveda is one of the living sciences of India today. Many of them has become museum specimens. Some of them are practiced in certain pockets. Some of them, fortunately, being safeguarded by some community somewhere in remote places, which has not properly documented. And what we see today as Ayurveda also is tip of the iceberg. I feel the institutions, the individuals who are practicing, who are carrying the knowledge of Ayurveda in a form of clinical exposition of that practices, only tip of the iceberg. So 90% of Ayurveda theory and practice is yet to be explored, waiting to be explored, waiting to be exposed. This is what one should know. We should not think that Ayurveda is what we see today. And the 3 levels of Ayurveda, which I always very keen to tell people who are thinking in this line, that the Tattva level, the Shastra level, and the Vyavahara level. We have been talking about only the Vyavahara level of Ayurveda, which is a practical experience gathered over thousands of years and used by many physicians and households and ordinary people and the villagers for their practical needs. There is something above and beyond that. That is the real Ayurveda. Based on that only, we can bring in new things in Ayurveda. So if Ayurveda as a science of a evolutionary nature, it has been evolving from the Vedic period to Shaligrama of 19th century or after that. That has grown up because of we have been using that tattva level of science and building on that. So this is the background in which I would like to take today's talk. And I would like to share some of my thoughts in the slides form. I hope it is, you can see the slides clearly, or?
Yes, sir, it is clear. It's clear, sir.
Okay.
Yes, I can see clearly, yes.
So we give a lot of importance to Pathya and Apatya. And many Ayurveda people who know Ayurveda will know Pathya Sadi Gadartasya Kimaushal Niruvane. Pathya Asadi Gadartasya. If there is wholesome food, there is no need for medicine. If there is no wholesome food taken by a person, the medicine will not work. This is the basic. The aharam is given that much importance in Ayurveda. And we say that why Pathyam is important. Pathyam is important because the Sharira Upajaya, the Balavardhana, the Ayush Vardhana, all these 7 factors which describes the growth of human life system is based on the ahara that we ingest. If ahara that we ingest is not in the category of Pathya, that will not add to the dhatu upajaya of the body system. So it is very important for us to see that what we take today is of Pathya in nature. And when we say Pathya about the food, it also denotes that that food that is Pathya has to come through a route which is amicable, which helps that food to be Pathya in the form. Pathya is not at the end form of the diet which it comes to the plate. Before that food comes to the plate, it comes through a great process of from the soil, from the cooking processes. All those things are taken into consideration in Ayurveda. So what we will see in Ayurveda is that it has gone into the details of how a thing that is going to be a dhatu porshana dravya in your body, how it has been created and what are the things that is required for its natural way of coming into your plate. So land is given importance and how it is processed is given importance. And what are the things we add to that also is important. When we talk about land, it says our land should be of a certain types. Ayurveda talks about Anupadesha, Ayurveda talks about Jangala Desha, Ayurveda talks about Sadharana Desha. It also talks about which are the natural habitat of that place, how that every year, every place, what are the ideal things that can be grown, etc. are very clearly explained in the land need. If the slides are jumping in your screen or it is coming clearly sometime. The land should not be containing toxic elements, should not be flooded with toxins, which is the state of the art now. These are all explained in Ayurveda for a healthy food to be grown. And we also talks about preservation of food. How to preserve the food is also one of the area Ayurveda explains. And hygienic and safe preservation and how the food item must not have direct exposure to sunlight, wind or moisture. All those aspects you can see that is being explained in Ayurveda. The conventional farming, as I told you earlier, we never envisage any kind of external inputs which are not natural in the farming. The manure that we have, the way we cultivate, the way we plow, everything has got its own implication and its own effect on the thing. We go for the natural seeds.
Sir, you're sharing the screen, sir? Nice.
Yeah.
It seems to be jumping a bit, sir.
because it is the iPad I am using. I think this.
Okay, sir.
So I think there is the conventional paradigms for agriculture is entirely different, which may give us a very immediate effect of jumping up the harvesting quantity of the material, but in the long time, all these things are disastrous. See, a farming method that we developed over thousands of years, within 100 years or 200 years of the modern farming has destroyed the whole soil out of recognition. So you can see how unscientific is one system which you have been propagating, and how scientific is our system which does the same thing over and over. Same land you have been cultivating, same thing. We know how the alternative harvesting as cultivation has been in practice. All those things show that the science behind these systems are so deep and so balanced. It never goes for a short-time benefit. It looks the thing as a whole. When you say Ayurveda as a whole, these are the elements that what make Ayurveda as a holistic system. So as you look into to the land, look into the farm and the processing system, and there is a whole branch of Ayurveda, which I'm sure Balu will be explaining in great details. This Vriksha Ayurveda, which are very few texts are today available, and there are very few practitioners are there today who are exponents of this science. This talks about unconventional method of today's any unconventional method which to increase the quality, increase the productivity, increase the, even in gene transferring methods are even taught theoretically in that. That is where I say that this part of Ayurveda is waiting to be explored and experimented. So there are many texts in Vriksha Ayurveda, starting from Brihad Samhita, Lopakarana, and Sargadhara's certain parts, etc., which explains a lot about how agriculture has to be done, how plant has to be nurtured, how plants has to be grown, how cultivation has to be increased, how the natural methods of manuring, natural methods of pesticide, how to make pesticide naturally, how to use it. All those things are very greatly explained. Even some of them are even practiced today in a small scale. There is a need for upscaling it. There is a need for making it more available, more popular, more tangible, and for more commercially viable, etc., etc. This is one aspect told in Ayurveda. There are certain examples to see some of the plants which are used for green manure, some of the methods which are used for green manure. All those things are showing to the, these are all indicators. What I want to say is it's not to expose all of the science, but show you that there is an indication that there is a deep science behind this, and we know how to live in tune with the nature in a sustainable way, in a way which will not destroy the place where we are living. Habitat has been our part. We are never away from the habitat, and we know how to use the resources in a sustainable way. So each and every aspect that Ayurveda, whether it is harvesting, whether it is cultivating, whether it is collecting and processing, all those things are based on this principle. And there are many other plants which I am sure the next speaker will be talking about that on Vriksha Ayurveda, how to use many of these plants for many preparations of leaf extracts and other things. And there are medicinal plants which has natural pesticides. Some of them are Nimba, Nirgundi, Kadamba, Karanja, etc., which are there. So what I want to make my point here is that Ayurveda as a science of healing and well-being is a part of a whole philosophy based on a sustainability of the cosmos along with the living being. It never separates the living being out of the external universe. It understands, it absorbs this principle, and everything told in Ayurveda, whether it is medicine preparation, whether it is living a healthy life, whether it is treatment aspects, everything you can see this principle. That is how Ayurveda has been made. And if you look into other sciences like Ayurveda also, we will see the same principle being working in this area. And plant protection also is there. And we have to understand that the efficacy and benefits of food depend to a large extent on the quality of the ingredients that go into the food. For this quality to be achieved, the process begins in the land where the food is grown, the nature and energy of the soil, the gentle and sensitive non-chemical method of farming. All those things are counted to make a right kind of food. So I believe that organic farming is not a new thing to India. India's agricultural method, India's old method, way of life is always organic, because we say that Panchabhudatmakam Deham and Logam also Panchamahabhutama. Everything is made out of same element, and there is a connecting link between these two, and we never separate the living being, which is the micro, with the world outside. So whatever we say in Ayurveda is based on these principles of dynamic equilibrium being maintained within the body in tune with outside. So the external things that we see today as a temporary improvement on many other things are not sustainable, are not will not do good for the human being as humanity as a whole. We have to look into the principles that is laid down in our civilizational experience over thousands of years to do anything in Ayurveda. So Ayurvedic farming is nothing different from the way India has been doing the farming. And Ayurveda, even in collection, in processing, in all this area, Ayurveda gives the importance of time, desha, kala, all those things have been very clearly described. So this is how we look into it. One of the problems that we face, that especially the hybrid thing and the modern chemical fertilizers, it completely changes the nature, the way that we are being built. Even it can change the character of the genes. So we don't know how this is going to affect us in long time. It is one of the frightening things to people like us is the GMO that is being introduced. Somehow we are able to prevent it to some extent in this country, but if it is coming to the work, the all soya that is being available in India is genetically modified. And we say it is a better protein. That protein, how it is going to do the dhatu portion, how it is going to be excreted by the body, how it is accepted by the body in a long time is one doesn't know. Even now there is a new area of the nanoparticle being introduced to the food item to give you better iron supplement. So this kind of very dramatic changes are happening, which are actually changing the way the human life is evolving. So we do not know the next gene that we produce through our offspring will be the same as we are, which is uncontaminated today. Today, even genes are going to be expressed in a different way. With this point, as a note of caution, I think there is a need for us to think about whether to what chemicals are to be used, how, whether it is to be used at all those things has to be understood in a very different way. The way Ayurveda has given us a framework to think. It is not that we don't have a framework to think. We have a framework to think. We have got a basic theory to explore. And if you are able to put it into practical applications, we will be able to face the calamities being posed to us with the different sources. So with these few words, I hope I have served the purpose of giving Ayurvedic view in organic farming and what it is meant for science like Ayurveda. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Ayurveda Acharya Gangadharanji, for that lecture. I was especially happy to hear your very forthright views on the challenges that we face concerning especially our soil and water. The notion of contamination is something that, as you said, there are these new agents, GMOs, nanotechnologies, CRISPR, gene editing, and so on. These, I do feel very strongly, have to be minutely examined for what they truly are, what they truly signify, and for the dangers that they represent to our knowledge system. Thank you so much. And I do hope you will be able to stay with us for some of the questions that I'm sure will be arriving. However,
Yes,
we will,
I'll be staying.
for viewers, thank you. Viewers, please line up your questions. We'll take them at the end of the session. And without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Balasubramanian to begin on Vriksha Ayurveda.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. I'm thankful to the Indic Academy and AVP for inviting me on this occasion and giving me a chance to make a presentation about Vriksha Ayurveda. So I'll straight away get into a PowerPoint. Can I have a share screen facility? Is it already enabled? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So my presentation is going to be on Vriksha Ayurveda, traditional Indian plant science, its current relevance and potential. I am from the Center for Indian Knowledge Systems based in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu. We have been working for over 25 years on traditional Indian agriculture, working with farmers groups in Tamil Nadu on the one hand, as well as on the theoretical foundations of traditional agriculture, namely Vriksha Ayurveda. So my presentation is organized as the first part with introduction. Can everybody see the screen and hear me clearly?
Yes.
Thank you. So first I give a brief overview of the introduction and source material. Then the question may come, are these practices tested, validated? How do you utilize them? Certain unique Vriksha Ayurveda approaches, some examples, and conclude with the current relevance and potential. So what is Vriksha Ayurveda? So Ayurveda is the science of life in a broad sense. Mriga Ayurveda is Ayurveda for animals, and Vriksha Ayurveda is really Ayurveda for plants and trees. And the word Vriksha Ayurveda occurs in various ancient lists of 64 arts, and terms related to Vriksha Ayurveda are also found in that. What are the source material of Vriksha Ayurveda? First of all, there are classical literature, what we may call a Shastriya Parampara. Just as you have classical texts of Ayurveda, there are also a whole lot of classical texts relating to Vriksha Ayurveda. First, in terms of source material, we have classical literature, what we call as Shastriya Parampara, as well as folk literature, which we call as Lok Parampara. And classical literature really has texts as manuscripts of published books. They have clearly spelled out theoretical framework, and they have fundamental principles drawn from Ayurveda based on Panchamahabhut Siddhant, Tridosh Vichar, and so on. And there are Puranas and Samhitas, there are general texts, as well as texts that are specific to Vriksha Ayurveda, like Surapala's Vriksha Ayurveda, and so on. Now, what is the scope of Vriksha Ayurveda? What's the kind of thing that these Vriksha Ayurveda texts talk about? It's quite comprehensive. They talk about collection, selection, and storage of seeds, germination and sowing, various techniques of plant propagation and grafting, testing and classification of soil, selection of soil suitable for various plants or types of plants, manuring, pest and disease management, description and classification of plants to suit varied purposes, favorable and unfavorable meteorological conditions, Tithi and Nakshatras for cultivation, use of plants as indicators for weather, water, and minerals. Folk literature, on the other hand, Lok Parampara, is something that you can find in popular magazines and newsletters. There are special compilations such as the one that has been made interestingly even by ICR, Indian Council of Agricultural Research. One of the important sources of folk knowledge is the Honeybee Network that's been publishing for over 25 years, folk knowledge and agriculture in English and various other Indian languages. Then there are journals such as Asian Agri-History Foundation, which has been publishing again for over 25 years. Indian Journal of Traditional Knowledge of CSIR has also been publishing a lot of folk literature. One of the important questions that we all face when we talk about folk knowledge of farmers' practices is all sorts of things are done. Has these been tested, validated, and has they been used anywhere? So I want to just go through a few minutes of that. There is a major effort that has been made by the Indian Council of Agriculture Research itself. Interestingly enough, it's hardly known. Then there have been efforts like my parent organization, Center for Indian Knowledge Systems, efforts by various other organizations. Let's take a look at this major effort by ICAR. Between the years 2002 and 4, ICAR carried a survey and documentation of traditional knowledge relating to agriculture. They published a total of 7 volumes documenting some nearly 5,000 practices. These were the kinds of volumes that were published by ICAR. And these practices are classified as those relating to tillage and intercultural management, crops and cropping systems, pest and disease management, farm implements, grain and seed storage from various parts of the country. What's most interesting was that ICAR took up then an effort for testing and validation of these efforts. They picked out about 115 of these practices, shared it between scientists in agriculture universities, Krishi Vigyan Kendra, state universities for testing and validation. For example, this particular screen shows you the use of Naxvomica, that is Coccola, cow dung, compost and brinjal for controlling fruit and shoot bearer. There is a particular person from Bhanjanagar in Ganjam district in Orissa who has said that such and such a type of cow dung compost mixed with Naxvomica can be used for controlling fruit and shoot bearer. The experiments were designed, and if you look at the final conclusion on the bottom right hand corner, you can see the use of Coccola mixed cow dung compost reduces the incidence of fruit and shoot borer considerably, matching with the claim of the disclosure. This is an interesting conclusion. Now we have done a meta-analysis of this ICMR results. What it shows is that of the 111 practices that were put to test by ICAR, 95 were proved valid, 3 were proved partly valid, 2 were to be repeated, which means that nearly 90% of the total practices are proved, tested, validated by modern scientific methods, which is quite a remarkable figure. 10 of them have been reported as non-valid. Now, if we take a look at some of those 10 practices, we also find that a lot of this traditional knowledge also has location specificity. If you transport something from a village of Orissa to a laboratory that's 100 kilometers away, sometimes the conditions are changing and you don't reproduce that. So we have to take a close look even at this not valid results. But this is just to give you a glimpse of the kind of results that even ICAR tests show. For over 25 years, CIKS has also been involved in these efforts. I'll just share with you a glimpse of some of the kinds of things we've done. This is the campus of Theosophical Society, which is more than 300-acre campus, Adyar Estuary, near Madras or in Madras city. About 20 years back, Theosophical Society said that we have a major problem with controlling mango leaf webber. And the symptoms are that the larvae web the leaves and completely feed on them. The leaves wither and dry up. They said, look, we are theosophists and we don't want to use any hard chemicals. You've been talking about Vikshire with that. Can you suggest something to us? So a team consisting of CIK's people, including Vaidya Shyam Sundar, was working with us, got to work on this problem. What did we do? We took the help of Vikshire with that. We said, let's use a mixture of neem oil and pungam oil spray, fumigate with Daruharidra and Vayu. These are substances that are known to be crimigna. And we found that the plant growth was enhanced and the yield was very good, So this is something which gave us a lot of confidence, and gradually we started practically testing out the approaches and recipes of Vikshire very, very widely. Through the years, we have come up with packages of practices for cultivation of various of these crops based on Vikshire with both textual and farmers' practices. For example, we have come out on the left-hand side, you see publication on organic cotton cultivation. On the right side, you see a publication on Ayurveda for plants. Similarly, Neem, a user's guide, organic paddy cultivation, every one of them includes not just practices from the text of Vriksha Ayurveda, but also incorporates a lot of farmers' practices, which is a Lok Parampara of Vriksha Ayurveda. Just to give you an example of the way in which the Lok Parampara unfolds, a common practice that you'd see in the rice fields of Tamil Nadu is people will have a small gunny bag, sakumute that's made of jute, which is filled with neem seed cake, and they'll place it in the irrigation channel where the water comes in and irrigates the paddy crop. So the water that comes in soaks through this neem seed cake. It serves as a biopesticide as well as a biofertilizer. This makes perfect sense from the point of view of Vriksha Ayurveda, also from the point of view of modern agriculture. We have incorporated and built such practices. Then there are fumigation methods that are used for various pests, like in the cotton field. Diluted cow's urine is something that's extensively used in Tamil Nadu for seed treatment. We've also come up with publications on use of animal products in traditional agriculture, for which we have done a pilot project. Some of the research type of topics that we explored are, you see, if you look at Ayurveda, there are medicinal products for immediate use, like Swarasa, which is fresh juice, or Kashaya, which is a water decoction, which you have to use overnight. You can't store it for more than a day. Then there are storage forms of Ayurvedic products like Churnam, Arka, which is a distillate, Taila, which is an oil, Aswa and Arishta, which are fermented products. The challenge that we were facing was, if you are using natural products for pest control and crop protection, you have an entire generation of farmers who are used to diluting bottles of chemical pesticides. They said, you are asking us every time to boil so many kilos of leaves, so many kilos of roots, filter it. Is there a ready-made alternative that you have similar to chemical pesticides? So what we said was, why don't we prepare certain Ayurvedic extracts like Arkas, Aswas, Arishtas using these pesticidal plants. They are cheaper and effective. Plant extracts are available throughout the year. They are non-polluting. That is, with an arka, if you make, let's say, a garlic arka, or if you make a adadoda or a pudina arka, it's non-polluting. There's no requirement of toxic or corrosive chemicals, no requirement of high temperature or pressure. Process is low cost. Most importantly, the technology for things like preparing kashayam, thailam, arishtam is widely known to our people, to our Vaidyas and the village people. Now, what are the kinds of tasks that have to be undertaken that I see with respect to Vriksha Ayurveda? There is a lot to be done by way of documentation and publication. There is a lot to be done by way of education and dissemination. For example, a whole lot of Ayurvedic physicians can go through an entire 5-year course of BMS, perhaps come out without knowing that there is a whole branch of Ayurveda as Vriksha Ayurveda. Even among Ayurvedic physicians themselves, there is a need for awareness and understanding. There is also a need to do a whole lot of research. For example, Vriksha Ayurveda may give clues saying that there are some herbs or plants that are crimigna, but what is the particular plant of choice that's to be used for virus, what's to be used for the paddy crop, what's to be used for brinjal? These are things that you have to go into a bit deeply by way of research, using both the Lok Parampara and the experimental method. Lastly, I want to just speak a few words about what I think is the current relevance and potential of Vriksha Ayurveda. At least there are 3 different areas in which I see a lot of possibilities: medicinal plants cultivation, sustainable agriculture, and in fact, a new paradigm for agriculture. With respect to medicinal plants cultivation, the era of continuous harvesting of medicinal plants from the wild is already drawn to an end. Ayurveda and traditional medicine industry has to look towards plantations for future requirements. Obviously, we cannot and should not cultivate medicinal plants with chemical packages. There's no sense in growing your medicinal herbs using urea, phosphate, or chemical pesticides. Vriksha Ayurveda offers powerful knowledge base for developing organic and natural methods for cultivation of varied medicinal plants. This is one thing. Sustainable agriculture, both at the national and global levels. In the food production is not keeping pace with the increasing global population. The purely chemical approach has reached its limits due to problems of sustainability, environmental and health concerns. There is a global trend and interest towards acceptance of sustainable organic farming as a way forward. India can emerge very strongly as a global leader, building on indigenous knowledge and wisdom of Vriksha Ayurveda. Lastly, this can provide a new paradigm for agriculture. The reductionist paradigm of modern agriculture has severe limitations, and organic agriculture seeks a new paradigm. Vriksha Ayurveda has a powerful theoretical framework drawing from Panchamahabhut Siddhanta and Tridosh Vichara. The theoretical framework of Vriksha Ayurveda offers a powerful alternative paradigm to comprehend plants and health and disease, as well as to understand plant growth. So this is just meant to give you a bird's eye view and introduction to Vriksha Ayurveda, which is a novelty. A lot of people may not have heard the term at all. This is not meant to be a very comprehensive presentation on Vriksha Ayurveda. There may be other occasions and forums for doing that. But this is just to give you a bird's eye view and to whet your appetite on the matter. So I'll just conclude with this couple of very interesting quotations from two different sources. Dr. Maheshwari, who was one of India's greatest modern botanists, he spoke about 1965, I think it was the Indian Science Congress. He said, in fact, even in the modern world, plant power means as much or more than water power, sea power, atomic energy, and so on. For obtaining plants, men have gone forth with the sword to distant lands, set upon long voyages, and conquered new lands. In fact, along with this, he gives a beautiful panoramic history of how and which plants shape geography and polity, including what is the impact of introduction of tea, coffee, rubber in various parts of the world, spices, what it meant to the ancient Indian trade of the Roman Empire, indigo and what it meant, rubber and what it meant during the Second World War, and so on. Finally, there's a beautiful Subhashita sloka that I'll close with. Amantram aksharam nasti nasti moolam anaushadam ayogya purusho nasti yojakastatra durlabha. There is no letter that's without the power of mantra. And similarly, there is no plant or root that is without medicinal value. This may sound rather dramatic and exaggerated, but anybody who goes through the length and breadth and depth of the knowledge that people have had with the use of plants, both at the folk level and at the Shastric level, would see the truth of this. So I'll conclude my presentation here and stop. I welcome comments, suggestions, questions. Thank you for this opportunity for giving a bird's eye view about Vriksha. Thank you.
Remarkable. Thank you so much, Baluji. That was absolutely exhilarating because it proves once again that we have very much the technology, the science, the worldview to recast our way of strengthening the interconnectedness between Ayurveda and cultivation. There should never have been a disconnection. I'd very much like to ask Ayurvedacharya Gangadharanji to please step in because, as you said, this Baluji is able to dilate at length on Vriksha Ayurveda. And I'd like to come back to what you had talked about earlier, which is that we seem to be stuck at the level of the tattva, whereas the shastra we seem to be stuck at the level of the vyavahara. It is the vyavahar that has been in a way deviated from its original purpose. Do you see from what Baluji has just told us a way to revive and repair some of the damage that has been caused over the last century or so?
I think even though in a slow pace, the whole world is moving towards this theory and philosophy of Indian knowledge system, not Ayurveda alone. For example, one of the things that we come, the concept of One Health concept that is being promoted all over the world, where we see that health of human being alone is not a possibility at all. Health of human being, the animals and other beings, and the environment. Without environmental health, you cannot have a physical health. And physical health is not health at all. It's not a superficial health. Physical health, physiological health, emotional health, spiritual health, all those, these are connected. The problem that I see today is that there is not a single institution with a visionary zeal to encompass this idea that Balu has been very extensively explaining. To take it out, make things to work, take each aspect of this based on Ayurvedic fundamentals, how to take it up. So we need an institution of IIT, IIM kind of caliber with profound experienced persons with very great experience. This can take up. I think all world is, with the present environment, India is slowly posing to be intellectual leader in many areas, even though most of these Indians are not in India outside, but still we say that this roots is here. And one of the problem with us, I think last 70 years has been, we have been in a hands to mouth situation. Always we are trying to how to fill our belly, then enrich our brain. So this problem slowly now going away. We are getting rich enough to contribute and invest on long-term things. And ancient sciences have completely gone to oblivion because of the Western ethnocentric worldview that we have been lodging in our mind for so many years. The slavery mindset has to change. You have to usher a new type of a leadership, not only a political leadership that's important, but a scientific leadership, like people like Balu represents that. We have to have such things to come up, then only this can be taken up. It's a large ocean. What you have discussed is only one of the drops in that big ocean. If you explore, it is mind-boggling. Any other, I think if you think from the mindset of the people in Israel, we should be feel ashamed of ourselves. A country like Israel who come up with so many things from ashes. We with such a great tradition of civilization of 10,000 years or more, and so many things within our plate. We are not touching those things in our plate. We are just looking at others' plate to take from something from there. That attitude should change. It needs resources. It needs a new mindset. It needs a good leadership. It needs a long-term plan with the annual outcome. I don't say that you should plan for 20 years and sit and on that. No. We can have immediate. If you look into the last 3 years, Nobel Prizes, especially 2016, 19, and 15. One is on autophagy, one is on that starvation of cells, one is on that artemisia annua. All the three are practically showing to the depth of indigenous knowledge system, not only for India, all Oriental countries share, China shares some of our worldview. So there is a great scope, and there need to be a networking of these like-minded things. There need to be a governmental kind of support to be initiated for this. I think a lot of things can be done. And what I say in my initial presentation, that what we are seeing today is the tip of the iceberg. Please believe me, 90%, 99% of things in Indian knowledge system here waiting to be explored. It is sometime active and alive in some pockets, luckily, somewhere in the villages or somewhere, maybe some institutions, some individuals, but most of them are to be explored. One individual's work for 25 years can bring this much. Then imagine what we can do otherwise. So, we are all driving towards that. We are trying for that, but the momentum is not enough to get into the mainstream as of today. We have to create more momentum. We need more political and other kind of strength for that.
Thank you so much, Lingadharanji. Dr. Aramya, would you like to?
Yes, actually, there are a few questions which have come up. I think it can be addressed since we've got almost 10 minutes now.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So this is a question to Balasubramaniam, sir. And is a modern scientific research requirement in development of new farming techniques? Or do you feel we have the information, just need to implement? And how can it be implemented on a large scale with corporate agribusiness everywhere in India?
I think there's a whole lot of knowledge and practices which had to be tested and adapted. I don't see scientific research techniques as being antithetical to traditional knowledge. For example, let's say in the year 2005, tsunami hit coastal Tamil Nadu, and tens of thousands of hectares of land were under salt water for between 20 and 120 minutes. When the salt water withdrew, that pieces of land became totally unfit for cultivation by any modern or hybrid variety. However, there are traditional rice varieties in Tamil Nadu, one called Kalar Pale, which means Kalar Nelathil Vilayakudiyathu, that grows in alkaline saline soil, which can grow even in that soil and give a moderate yield. Similarly, we found from far away Gorakhpur district in UP. There is a variety called Kala Namak, which is a black aromatic rice, which can again be cultivated in that patch. So both those, based on traditional knowledge, we brought it, tested, and found that it grows well. So it's a question of testing and adapting knowledge where it is required. It can be done. I don't see that as being excessive. Sometimes you have to, in new circumstance, fix the dosage. Decide if you have to spray it as a kashayam or you have to irrigate it as a solution. At what stage of growth you have to spray. All these can go hand in hand with this. There's also a question about, is there a bibliography on Vriksha Ayurveda? Last year, an Asian Agricultural Foundation had written a review article on current relevance and the potential of Vriksha Ayurveda. It is like a 25-page bird's eye view thing with 40-50 references. I can share the reference to the organizers for a start. That can be a comprehensive bibliography of source material relating to Vriksha Ayurveda.
That'd be great, sir. Thank you. Sir, Gangadharan sir, we have a question for you, sir. Does Ayurveda have enough capacity to serve or provide knowledge to different nations with different topographies, with different cultures and food habits, including areas such as deep Amazon or high Himalayas, where tribes and folks may traditionally eat whatever is available?
See, there are two basic foundational principles in Ayurveda. One is that say that Jagatteva Manaushadam na vidya kinjit vasad nanartha yogayoho. And Balu was telling Nasti Moola Manaushadam Yojakas Tatra Durlabha. That is one thing. Second thing is that Yasya Deshas to Yo Jandu Tasya Tajaushadam Hidam. So Ayurveda never says that for a condition to be treated in a certain geographical space, we have to go and hunt for a medicine from 1,000 kilometers away. No. That's why we have got so many. We have got more than 100,000 health manuscripts in regional languages and in Sanskrit, which are expositions of the collective wisdom that has been created over the years, and some of them got documented in a written form. So everywhere, one of the challenges the intellectuals of Ayurveda should face and succeed is that how we can adapt Ayurveda to different ecosystems and geographical spaces. For example, is that there are Shad Ridus, 6 seasons. 6 seasons are seen only in certain places of Gangetic Plain, where the Shishira, the Vasanta, Girishma, Varsha, Sharat, Hidma. But if you come to south, you see that all the 6 Ridus are not there. The Varsha Ridu has got a Pravrit also along. Pravrit is a new Ridu being honored by Sushruta because there is a variation. And here the Shishiram and Hemandam are less. So what I will say that go by the Lakshana, not by the month or by the thing. Ridu Lakshanas, if you understand, you can understand any geographical space, how it works. And if you can learn the bio resources there, you can adapt. It's a big challenge. You have to do it. It's just been done. How Ayurveda went to other places, how Ayurveda went to Sri Lanka, how Ayurveda went to other places. You're using the resources there. For example, if you see the evolution of Ayurveda from 10 plants of Veda Samhita to 62 plants of Adharvaveda to 1,200 plants of Shaligram and Nigundu, the latest Nigundu, and the 7,000 plants being documented by the ministry in 2010 or 2002 in a 12-year survey, is that there is knowledge being added every time. There are new plants being come to India, being studied by tribals and used. Some plants which are used for fish killing in the plant, and it's a new plant. Or even things which are used by folk tradition, which are not there in the classical texts are an example of Ayurveda is being adapted. See, Ayurveda is not in the texts of Charaga, Sushruta, Vapada. Charaga, Sushruta, and Vapada are Edal Sarvam, Udaharana Matram, Buddhimadam, Manda Buddhina, Uvyojyartha. It is only an example for people who know the science. That's why I told you Tattva, Shastra, and Vyavahara. We are playing around with Vyavahara because that gave us Vyavahara. We are surviving because of that Vyavahara. We have to go beyond Vyavaharam, then Ayurveda can be applied on the continents of the world globally. And everything in the place are medicinal. Only thing is we are documented Dravya Guna of some of the species in India, that not all the species. That doesn't mean that other plants are not medicinal. So, Amandaram Aushadam Nasti, Nasti Moolam Anaushadam is the cornerstone of Ayurveda. So it is there. But what I say is only theory. The last plant I have seen being explained by one of the veterans of Ayurveda, Vaidya Vilas Thandal of Pune, who is no more. He studied one plant, his group studied one plant called Bija Parni, Parna Bija, which I am using in my practice today, especially for kidney stones and urinary calculus. He has studied that plant, nowhere told. He told about his morphology, Rupa Jnanam, Rasa Jnanam, Guna Jnanam, everything has been explained. Like that, we need stalwarts, experts who work from the Tattva level. Then there are some efforts in Europe even today to study the European plants as per the basics of Ayurveda, and they are using it. There is a whole company in Switzerland who makes European plants-based Ayurveda products, and they are selling. So these are possibilities which you are not explored. That's why I told there is a need for an institution with a sound footing on these areas. Ayurveda is not at all Indian to be applied on it. It is Indian origin, but it has got a global value, and it can reach to global society, and people are looking for that.
Sir, can you please throw light, just a tint of the book you have co-authored with Vandana Shiva, so that it has been one of the questions that has been asked.
That's a very wonderful work I feel satisfied doing with Vandana, like Vandana Shiva, that we have seen that the whole world is going to a direction which is catastrophic. It is not to be allowed for the larger interest of the humanity. And we as Indians has got a responsibility and right to question that kind of a reductionistic approach, which serves the purpose of few vested interest groups. And slowly, 3-4 groups are going to govern the developmental tangent of all humanity. So what we have done is we have taken elements from Indian sciences, including Ayurveda, and we have tried to explain in that book how it is possible to have a parallel way of development, which is all-inclusive, and it is also compassionate. It is a science of compassion. If we don't eliminate anyone, we see that the growth is holistic. It's not that one individual grows and others may to serve. So that is that book about us. I think that should be a starting point of debate, and it is meant for an international global dialogue between the developmental paradigm that is being perpetuated by the vested industry-based interest groups and the people who are interested in this globe's infinitive existence with all the bioresources available to us. Everything is killing. That's why I quoted that that example of nanoparticles being used for improving anemic condition, which then there are so many other parallels I have even quoted. So I have gone to the details of Ayurveda's wisdom and tried to see how it is giving a parallelly and more precisely and more clearly and more comprehensively a developmental paradigm. The book's name itself is Future of the two ways of future. One is with the ecological system intact, one is with the destructive and monoculture tendency. I will be available. I will be happy to give that link. That book is not in the printed form now. It is only available in digital format. I told to everyone that we should not price it for a reason. We should make it available to all of you who are interested. It's a very highly researched work, and I feel proud of that book.
Great, sir. So over to you, sir. Rahulji.
Well, thank you so much, Gangadharanji and Baluji, for that very, very illuminating session. I'm very happy that we were able to move from Jaivik, in fact, to a development paradigm discussion, which I feel is so essential to India at this stage. And I do hope we are able to maintain this relationship between our institutes, our centers, Indic Academy, AVP, CIKS, and yours, Gangadharanji.
Risa. Risa is the name. Risa, R-I-S-A.
Risa, yes, Risa. Because as you said, and as Balu has been reminding us for a long time, there is a very urgent need to be able to educate. He mentioned this, that the Vaidya community itself needs to understand Vriksha Ayurveda better. Every single substance that you hold in your hands and you transform into something that is healing actually has its origin in the soil and the water. And this is something that I do feel very strongly about. Let us please put our heads together at a later stage and come up with a program which can take this ahead. Thank you so much, Gangadharanji and Baluji, and to the participants as well for your excellent questions.